Chapter 6, Section 7 in the 7th grade textbook is entitled Simple Interest. This is a real-life application of what we've been doing with solving equations, in that we're working with the interest formula. Interest, as you can see, it's formally defined, is the amount of money that is charged for borrowing or using money, or the amount of money that is earned by saving money. So when we talk about interest, interest usually has a real negative connotation, especially these days where the economy is not so hot. Interest is the amount a bank charges you or a financial institution charges you for borrowing money. For instance, let's say you want to go out and buy a car, and you spend $3,000 on that car. But you don't have $3,000, so you have to go borrow some money from the bank. The bank just doesn't say, here's $3,000, pay me back $3,000 whenever you can. That's not the way it works, because the bank has to make some money along the way too. So the bank charges this thing called interest. So you're not only going to pay the bank back $3,000, but you're going to pay them back some extra in exchange for being able to use their money to buy that car. That's the interest. That's an extra amount that you have to pay back on top of the initial amount you borrow. Now, there's good connotations to interest too. All right. For instance, if you go put your money in a bank, in a savings account, a checking account, whatever type of account, you're basically lending the bank your money. Well, in exchange for lending the bank your money, they can pay you some extra money because they can use your money to do other things. So at the start of the month, you might put $100 in the bank, and at the end of the month, you're going to end up, if you don't take any money out, you might end up with $101 because the bank has paid you some interest in exchange for holding your money, basically, again, you lending them money. Unfortunately, interest rates for that type of thing right now are very low, and that's why we say interest rates tend to have more of a negative connotation, because in the idea of borrowing a car, buying a house, paying back a college loan, anything along those lines, chances are you're going to be paying interest because you're going to be paying the bank extra money on top of whatever you need to do whatever. Buy the car, buy the house, pay for school, whatever. But that's all interest is. It's an extra amount. Again, it can be in your favor or against you depending on the scenario. What we're talking about here is called simply simple interest. Simple interest is money paid only on the principal. It is found using the formula I equals PRT, where P represents the principal, R is the rate of interest, and T is the time in years. There's another thing called compound interest where, again, if we go back to that positive connotation, let's say you go back to your bank account, you put $100 in, at the end of the month you have 101. When they go figure out the interest at the end of then the next month, month 2, they're not figuring it out $100 again. They're figuring it on the $101 because you've already made that dollar in interest, plus then they're going to add to that amount now as opposed to the 100. That's the idea of compound interest. Basically, your interest makes you interest, or your interest loses you more money, depending on, again, the connotation here. We're just talking about simple interest, so just think of it one-time deal. All right, I put $100 in. Next month, I have 101. That's all we're going to talk about, is the idea of simple interest. Simple calculation. Multiply the principal, the initial amount, times the rate, the percentage rate, times the time of the loan, which always has to be expressed in years. That's how we find the interest. Principal, again, that's the amount of money deposited or borrowed. That's the initial amount of the loan, depending on your scenario. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. Find the missing value. And in this particular question, they're asking us to find I, the interest amount here. That's why this is grayed out here. But they've given me the principal, the rate, and the time. Now again, that formula that we saw just a minute ago, and it's written right here, we'll go through it, says to find interest, I've got to take the principal, which is the initial amount, multiply that by the rate, which is always a percentage, and then multiply that by the time. And again, the time, that's always given to us in years. If they give it to us in some other time frame, months, days, weeks, whatever, you've got to change it to match up with years. So for instance, if you're going to borrow money for 2 weeks, because there's 52 weeks in a year, you're going to write that as 2 over 52. if you borrow money for 187 days, all right, well, because there's 365 days in a year, you're going to write that as 187 over 365. It's always got to end up expressed somehow in relation to years. All right, but to find interest, we just multiply together the principal, the rate, and the time. And that equals my interest. So in this question, they told us that the principal was $575, the rate is 8%, and the loan is being out for 3 years. And we're supposed to figure out how much interest that's going to make me here. Well, the formula says I'm going to multiply together the principal, the rate, and the time. So 575, 8%, and 3 years. Well, when I do that here, notice 8%, as we did in 6.5 the other day, all right, that I'm going to change that to a decimal for the purposes of me using a calculator. If you have a percent key or you know how to use that percent key, by all means leave it 8%. But if you don't, 0.08 is the way to go. Remember, to change a percent to a decimal, you get rid of the percent sign and then move the decimal 2 times to the left, which is where 0.08 came from. So 575 times 0.08 times 3, that's 138. So this amount of interest being made is $138. Put that into some context for you. If I go to a bank and I put $575 in the bank, they're going to give me 8% on my money, and I leave that money for 3 years, I'm going to make $138 in interest. I'm still going to have my $575, but now I'm going to have $138 more. All right, if you want to put the negative connotation on it, if the bank loans me $575 for 3 years and I pay them 8% interest, when I pay that loan back, I have to give them the $575 plus the $138 in interest. All right, here's number 2. Now number 2 is a little bit different because as you can see what's different about this one, we were finding R a minute ago, or I a minute ago, now we're finding R here. So now we're going to have to go and find R, which is going to change the setup a little bit here. Again, the formula says I'm going to take the principal, multiply that by the rate, and multiply that by the time, and that's going to equal the interest. So let's dump in the numbers that we have here. All right, the principal is $1,700, so if I have that, I'm going to write $1,700. The rate, well, I don't know, so I'm going to have to leave that as rate. I can change that to a variable R, which is exactly what we're going to do in a second. The time here, time is going to change into 6. They gave that to us, and it's in years. And that's going to equal my interest, which is $204. All right, well, let's take a look at what we've got here. I got a variable on the left side. I got a number on the right side, but I've got 2 other numbers that are going to have to get over there as well. Well, here we go. Solving equations, part 3. Here we go. We're going to have to solve the equation to find R here. That's exactly what we're going to do. All right, so again, variable on the left, numbers on the right. You see 1,700's got to move. 6 has got to move so I can find R. It worked out great for us in interest because even though it was a little bit backwards from what we usually do, there were 3 numbers were all together and there was just time signs. We just multiplied. That's exactly what you're going to do every time you're going to find interest like we did in the previous question. Multiply, multiply, that's your answer. Unfortunately, if they're going to make us find P or R or T here, you're going to have to then solve an equation much like this one. So, you've got some choices here just like we always do. You can move the 1,700 and the 6 separately, or you can put 1,700 and 6 together and then move it all at once. As you can see, they decided to put these 2 guys together. They put the 1,700 and the 6 together and got down to 10,200 with this R equals my 204. Solve the equation now. Well, variable on the left again, number on the right, so we're going to move 10,200. Move 10,200 by doing the opposite. That's always the way we move something to the other side of the equal sign. So I'm dividing both sides by 10,200 now, and when I do that, I get 0.02 for R. Now, let's go back here because we've got one last thing to do. All right, remember, R, as we talked about in the introduction, that's always a percentage. This answer here is not a percentage, that's just a number. So what you want to do now to finish is you want to change that to a percent. How do we move that to a percent? We move the decimal 2 times to the right and add a percent sign. So I go twice to the right and add a percent sign, and that's 2%. So, put this back in context for you here. Let's put it in a positive light. If I put $1,700 in the bank pays me 2% interest on that money, which is probably a lot closer to real than the earlier question, and I leave it there for 6 years. At the end of 6 years, I'm going to have $204 extra dollars. Still going to have the $1,700 I put in there to start with, but now I'm going to have $204 extra. All right, here's number 2. Avery deposits $6,000 in an account that earns 4% simple interest paid annually. Now, the word annual, in case you're not familiar, means yearly. How long will it take for the total amount in his account to reach $6,800? All right, so they're going to go through and have us identify what they're looking for here in the beginning. All right, they're asking me to find the number of years it's going to take Avery's account to reach $6,800. Very clearly here in the last question, last line here, it's asking me how long is this going to take? That's time. Okay, so the time here is what they're looking for. That's why they're saying here that they're obviously looking for the number of years. So the thing we don't know is going to be t. That means somehow I have to have I have to have p, and I have to have r. Well, let's go look. I'm putting $6,000 into the account. That's the initial amount. So that's going to be my principal. Right, over there it says 4%. Well, remember, percent's always got to be the rate, because the rate is always a percent. So the interest rate is 4%. All right, the account balance is going to be $6,800. Now that's where we're going to have to extrapolate some information here. What they're saying here is that I started with $6,000, and at the end of this time frame, whatever that happens to be, we have to figure it out, I have $6,800. Well, that means I had to have magically made some money along the way here. So what they're doing is they're actually showing you here how the initial amount changes to get me to my balance. Well, if I started with $6,000 and I ended with $6,800, that means I had to have made some interest along the way. Well, if I started with $6,000 and I ended with $6,800, that means I made $800 along the way. That's going to be the figure in interest. Some people want to say it's $6,800 is the amount of interest. No. Remember, you always still have that initial amount in there. So I put $6,000 in there. Again, the situation is I'm not touching it. I'm not adding anything. I'm not taking it away. If that $6,000 goes in, it's always there. So when I go look later and I have $6,800 all of a sudden, that means somehow without me doing anything, I made $800. That amount is going to be the amount of interest. And now we found I, we already had P, we already had R. I have everything I need now to solve the equation. Okay, so let's go ahead and dump that in here. The principal again was $6,000. I'm going to multiply that by the rate and the time, but remember the time we don't know, and that's going to equal my amount of interest that I made, which after a little bit of detective work we figured out was $800. Right, the rate, as they gave it to us in the problem, the rate, percentage rate was 4%. But of course, you know I'm not going to write that as 4%. I'm going to change that to a decimal. I'm going to get rid of the percent sign and move the decimal twice to the left. That's 0.04. All right, well, let's simplify what we got there. All right, we're going to say variable on the left, like we're solving an equation, numbers on the right. So we see we've got to move the 6,000 and the 0.04. Well, just like in the last question, we can move each one of these separately, because we're going to have to get all these numbers over to the right, or we can combine them and move them all at once. Once again, they've decided to combine them and move them all at once. So they did that by putting the 6,000 and the 0.04 together, doing exactly what it says, 240. So this goes together, make 240. You still got T. It's it still equals 800. Keep the variable on the left, keep the number on the right. Move 240. Number's got to go to the right. How do I move something? Remember, when you want to move it to the opposite side of the equal sign, I did the opposite. Some of you might be going back here and going, well, wait, why didn't you do the opposite here? Remember, these are on the same side of the equal sign. I'm just combining them. I only do the opposite when I move something to the opposite side of the equal sign. I didn't do that here. They're on the same side, I just put them together. That's how I came up with 240. Check. Do 6,000 times 0.04 in your calculator if you don't believe me. That's where 240 came from. All right, so now this 240 is going to go to the other side. Now they're doing the opposite, dividing by 240. We end up with an answer that's about 3 1/3 or 3.3 repeating. So it's going to take about 3.33 years to have made that $800 in interest. And again, putting that scenario back in context, if I put $6,000 in the account, the bank pays me 4%, which might be a little generous right now. It'll take me 3 1/3 years to make that $800 in interest. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the concluding problems here. Number 1, we're asked to find the missing value. The interest is $600, the principal is $2,000, the rate we don't know, and the time is 3 years. So obviously here we're finding R because that's the reason R is blank. Let's put in what we know here. Again, the formula says I'm going to take the principal, multiply that by the rate, multiply that by the time, and that's going to equal the amount of interest. Well, the question says that I'm putting $2,000 into the bank. The rate, well, again, we don't know that, so that's going to be R. I'm going to put that money into the account for 3 years. Time is 3. That's going to equal how much I'm going to make in interest, which is $600. Well, let's solve that equation. Keep the variable on the left, move the numbers to the right. So we see the two guys we're going to have to move are going to be the 2,000 and the 3. Remember, numbers are going to go to the right. That's how we know they're going to have to move, because they're numbers and they're on the left. Right. Again, just like the other questions you heard in this presentation today, you've got choices. You can move each one of these separately or combine them first and move them as one. It's the same amount of work, so let's put them together. 3 and 2,000 go together to make 6,000. So I've got 6,000 R's, and it equals 600. All right, well, this is a multiplication equation now. Again, variable on the left, numbers on the right. Finish it. 6,000 is a number. It's got to go to the other side. How do I move it? I do the opposite. What's the opposite of multiplying by 6,000? Dividing by 6,000. So that's why I'm dividing across by 6,000. It's going to leave me R is equal to 600 over 6,000, or 0.1, or maybe 0.10 if that's better for you. Remember, I'm not done here in this particular question because I'm finding R. R always has to be a percentage. So now I want to change this into a percentage. How do I do that? Change a decimal to a percent. You move the decimal 2 times to the right and add a percent sign. So I go ahead and do that, and that changes this into 10%. Number 2, Linda deposits $10,000 in an account that earns 8% simple interest. How long will it take for the total amount in her account to reach $12,000? All right, so let's see what we got. Clearly we have the rate, 8%. Remember, that's always a percentage, so it's easy to spot. The question here, it's asking me how long. So it's pretty obvious that T, time, we don't know, but we'll find it out. She deposits $10,000 that they tell us way back here in the beginning, so that's the principal, the starting amount. So obviously the other component we're looking for here is I. Now what I don't want you to do is say, oh, there's one number left, that must be I. We've talked about this already. All right? If she starts with $10,000 and ends with $12,000, that $10,000 is still there. All right? Somehow now, though, she has $12,000 or an additional $2,000, because again, that $10,000 is already there. That extra $2,000, that's the interest. Now that we've figured that out, now I have everything I need. Again, the formula, the same formula you see up at the top, says take the principal, 10,000, multiply that by the rate, 8%, which you know I'm going to change to 0.08 in a minute. Multiply that by the time, well, we don't know that, but it equals the amount of interest, 2,000. So over here I've got 10,000 times 8%. Well, I'm going to go ahead and multiply those together. That's going to give me 800. So I got 800 T's equal to 2,000. Again, I changed this to 0.08, and then I multiplied it by 10,000. That's where 800 came from. T stays here. 2,000 stays there. Look at it. Once again, solving an equation. Do the steps. Keep the variables on the left. Keep the numbers on the right. So obviously we're going to move 800 out of the way here. How do I move that? Again, I do the opposite. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 800 here. So I've got 2,000 divided by 800 to find T here. 2,000 divided by 800 is going to change into 2.5. Which, remember, we found T, so that's an amount of time. So that means to make that $2,000 in interest, the money's got to be in the account for 2.5 years.